Hello, everybody, and happy Tuesday. Thanks for joining us today. I am so excited to be talking with Nadine Cornish here today. We are going to be talking about caregiving and how caregiving has changed in the pandemic. And let's be real, it's not going away. So we have to talk about this. So stay with us and enjoy the show. And if you have questions, if you're a family caregiver, a professional caregiver, you work in the industry, or you're just interested in this topic, you have an expert right here. So please interact with us, post your questions, and we'll get them answered for you. So, welcome, Nadine, to our show.
Thank you, Kathy. I am really glad to be here and looking forward to spending this time with you.
Yeah, tell our audience a little bit about who you are, what you do, and why you do it.
Okay, well, first of all, I always let people know that this chose me. I did not choose it.
I love that.
I am a devoted daughter who had the privilege of caring for nearly 15 years for my mom during her journey. And the outcome was not as we hoped. I wanted my mother to survive. I wanted her to thrive and have a long quality of life. And that was not to be. But the honor of my life was caring for my mother. My background is in public health, so advocating for my mother and making sure that she had access to everything that was available to her was possible because of the skill set that I already had. And in that 15-year journey, Kathy, I really came to understand that not everybody understood the necessity of advocating on behalf of their loved one. I also understood that there were varying degrees of access to quality health care. And when my mother transitioned, I think I took about a year off to breathe and to figure out what do I do now that I'm not my mother's primary caregiver. And I literally didn't have to wait long because the phone started ringing and people started asking for support. How did you do this? How do I how do I find this service? And I need help in the home, et cetera, right? And so that really was the catalyst for me launching the Caregivers Guardian, a support services organization for family caregivers that's been around now for almost 13 years.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. That is so cool. And here I'm showing the website for our audience so you can see what it looks like. And we'll have the link to it in our comments for the show as well. But tell us a little bit about the Caregiver's Guardian and what you do.
So at the Caregiver's Guardian, we meet the family caregiver wherever they are on the journey. We make sure they understand that first and foremost, they're not in this by themselves, even though it feels like it, but that there are support systems out there for the caregiver, the family caregiver, and it's really essential to access those resources and services so that the caregiver can actually thrive in the experience. And I meet people every single day, and everybody's got a different story in terms of what their caregiving experience is like and what it's about. And one of the things we find is that we spend so much time resisting the reality of caregiving that we're experiencing, and resisting the fact that we've said yes to this assignment, but this is really not where we want to be. And so we're constantly fighting up against everything, right? Every facet, including our loved ones that we're caring for, right?
Yeah.
And so, really helping caregivers understand the necessity of the transformation that has to occur during the caregiving journey. And the caregiving happens to us for a reason, and it happens so that we can tap into the side of ourselves that we may not often tap into. But we have to be willing and receptive to the idea of changing and transitioning in the journey. We want things to stay the same. We don't want things to change. We don't want to travel the trajectory, oftentimes, that the caregiving path has for us.
It's so great. You said some really, really important things in there. First of all, you said we said yes to
Mhm.
this.
Yeah.
I will tell you, I didn't know I said yes. I was because I was also that person, and, I was the person for my parents. I was power of
Mhm.
attorney jointly
Mhm.
with my brother, and then we have 2 other brothers who were part of the caring team, and they were all amazing, but I'm the only female, and my dad leaned on me.
Mhm.
My mom leaned on me when she could.
Mhm.
She was nonverbal the last couple years of her life, but I didn't know, and I think this is a very common experience for family caregivers in particular. I didn't know I said yes to it. I knew
Mhm.
I was helping. I knew I was being, the daughter I wanted to be, and I've never regretted it, but it
Mhm.
didn't occur to me almost until the end of their lives that I had said yes to a caregiving journey.
Right. And you're so right. There are so many people who basically they go to sleep and they wake up the next day and all of a sudden this responsibility is at their doorsteps, right? And for families, I think it's so important, Kathy, that we have the conversation. We talk about what happens when life happens. It's going to happen, and we certainly want the best and we want the ideal scenario. But let's just have a conversation, while we're in my family, Scrabble is the thing. We have our conversations around the Scrabble board. And so it's like, why I'm trying to figure out how to use all 7 of my letters. I'm also asking, hey, to my mother-in-law, how are you feeling these days? It's been a few years that you've been in the home by yourself now. Are you still feeling like this is how you want to continue, that this is where you want to be? And it's a less threatening conversation when it's casual, and especially when nothing is looming, right? Nothing threatening at the moment. It's really much easier to have the conversation when we don't have the stress and pressure of a pressing scenario, right?
Yeah.
And so that conversation is always so enlightening because it informs it informs everyone of what your wishes are, what your preferences are. And even if your preferences are not reality, because everybody says forever I want to stay in my own home.
Right?
Well, it's like, okay, you got a 2,400 square foot home or a 2,000 square foot home, and you can no longer go up and down the stairs. So this is where we are at this point. So what are you thinking about? How are you thinking you want the next few years of your life to look, right? And those kinds of conversations are definitely informative around what are we thinking realistically, and where do we need to make adjustments in terms of the reality of our circumstances and what they're calling for.
Yeah, and in that scenario, I absolutely am a huge proponent for age at home as long as it makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
And both of my parents and I tell my stories only because I know my stories are everybody
Everybody else's
else's story,
story.
right? Different details, maybe, but
Mm-hmm.
essentially, when you've been on this journey, um, it's a journey. And my parents both said, "Do not put me in a home. Never. I'm not going in a home. Kill me before I go in a home." And like, it's like, wow. My husband kind of says the same thing, and I'm thinking, but both of my parents ended up in assisted living and memory care, and it gave them extra time in their lives that was valuable to us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I believe that we made it valuable for them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it is important to have those conversations. How do you have those conversations with parents who don't want to have them?
Yeah, then you find the person that they're willing to have the conversation with, because oftentimes the adult child is not the person they're willing to have that conversation with.
Well said.
But
Yeah.
it's a trusted, sometimes it's a niece or nephew, sometimes it's another sibling, sometimes it's the pastor or that respected member in the community that they really look up to, right? But really getting creative. oftentimes they're willing to have a conversation with a grandchild that they will not have with their own children.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
That is really interesting because there's not that dynamic, the
Mhm.
parent-child dynamic.
Exactly.
So, what do you think has changed in the pandemic?
Wow, the spotlight has changed, right? The spotlight is on the necessity of caregivers that we oftentimes, all too often, overlook, undervalue, underappreciate. And so I think that's one of the biggest things is absolutely the spotlight has changed, but the stress for caregivers is greater than it's ever been because as the rest of us are stressed with all of the challenges associated with the pandemic, it is exponentially increased for the caregiver who's working diligently to try to keep their loved ones safe in the home, safe in community, in facilities that they're in, all too often unable to visit, unable to be an active part of their loved one's life, whether they're in a community or living at home, right? Because of well, the months of us not being certain of what was happening. And then, we get certain and we get vaccinated, and there's still, this level of uncertainty and concern. So the pandemic has enhanced what was already challenging, is more challenging. It's increased stress, but it has also shined a spotlight on the reality of who's caring, who is a caregiver, even when they don't identify as a caregiver,
Mm,
right? And
mhm.
so I think that redefining what caregiving is and who is a caregiver has definitely happened during the course of this pandemic.
That's interesting, and how would you define a caregiver right now?
A caregiver is literally anyone that takes responsibility for looking after, checking in on, providing support, assistance to. If you are going to the doctors with a loved one, you may not be a primary caregiver, but you are in fact exercising the responsibilities of a caregiver. If you're checking in on a loved one on a regular basis and concerned and asking them questions about their care, or are you eating what you need? Is there anything that you need? Is there anything that I can do for you? Right? You literally are beginning that journey and that path of caregiving. And I think when we're fortunate enough to have people in our lives, particularly our elders, our seniors that we love, that they've always been there, they've always been that competent and responsible. And as we witness what happens with time, right? Things start to change. They're slowing down a little bit. They're not quite as sharp as they used to be. And as you start to recognize those things, you begin the journey towards caregiving, even though you may be in complete denial about that.
Exactly, exactly. I'm sitting here thinking what I didn't know I was on the journey, and what do we call that moment where you
Mhm.
realize something's not right? And
Mhm.
for me, it was when my mom couldn't add the check at the restaurant.
Okay.
All her life, she had no trouble with that. I
Yes.
watched her struggle and could not add the
Mhm.
amount that she had written for the tip, and that was a moment in my mind. So we all have these moments of something is not right. I don't know what it is. I don't know what
Exactly.
it means, but something's
Mhm.
not right. And
Mhm.
it's kind of like that's the moment you begin the journey, but you don't know that.
Exactly.
And how you get prepared as a family member if you're not ready to face it, if you're not ready to say, wow, there could be some dementia going on, there could be, early signs of something. How do you start to get yourself prepared for that?
So what's interesting, Kathy, is that the preparation actually begins as we look around and we recognize that our friends are having experiences with their parents,
Yeah.
right? We we tend to think that we're disassociated when we're very much associated. I don't think any of us can think back, just think back over the last 6 months. How many friends have you had a conversation with about challenges that they're beginning to experience with their parents or their grandparents or a beloved aunt or uncle, right? And so it's happening around us, even if it's not happening to us. And I think that there's great benefit in being a good friend and having those conversations, being that ear, that sounding board when a really good friend is sharing with you what it is that they're experiencing. And certainly based on the age group that you're in, if you're a baby boomer, there's no way you're not impacted at this point. And the reality is that the pandemic showed us that our caregivers are kids who are in elementary school. They're home with the grandparent, right? While mom or dad is out going to work or secluded in another part of the house working. But hey, I need you to keep an eye on your grandmother while I do A, B, and C for the next 2 or 3 hours, right?
Yeah.
And so children have had to step up. Children, teenagers, high school age students are wearing the caregiving hat, even though nobody's calling them a caregiver. They are indeed handling those responsibilities, and so it's all around us. If you choose to open your eyes and see, it's there, and that begins the preparation. Because if it's happening to your good friend, it's a good chance the age is similar, and your parents' scenarios may be very similar or not, but it absolutely gives you the invitation to think about and then to begin to discuss. Well, what happens when my parents are no longer in the position to take care of themselves, or there's a health crisis and they need support? How am I going to show up? How am I going to choose to support them in their journey?
And what can I do, right?
Mhm.
Because we have siblings.
Yes,
In some cases, we have
in many
siblings, we have
cases.
people, yeah, that we can share responsibilities with,
Yeah.
or there are resources that can help us. And I
Mhm.
know I felt so alone, and you addressed this earlier. You're not alone.
Mhm.
There are resources available
Absolutely.
through your website, through a plethora of other places, through your friends, through just Google search, and you'll find many, many resources. But really, to hone in on who are you going to put in your own support system as
Absolutely.
you are becoming the caregiver.
Absolutely. And the recognition that this is something that you don't have to do by yourself. So
Yes.
many people believe that, oh, well, this is my family. And because this is my family, family's going to take care of it. Can't family's going to do it. And it's wonderful when that is, in fact, the reality, but most often it's not. And you need outside support to help you balance, to help you maintain your sanity, and identify viable resources that will help everyone thrive through this process as best as possible.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and that's the point. We wanna thrive as
Yes.
best as possible, and it's not
Mhm.
gonna look like this, so we have to be realistic about our expectations of what that looks like, because it
Exactly.
probably won't look like thriving in every other area of your life,
No,
and
it's
it's
going to
so
be very
normal.
different.
Yeah,
Very different. Yeah.
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 So here's, I'll throw this out for my audience, here's something that made me thrive as a caregiver when I didn't know I was a caregiver. And that was purely to have the pleasure of knowing that I orchestrated my mom getting her hair cut, because it was the only thing that made her happy. So whatever hoops I had to jump through, and believe me, I jumped through a lot of hoops just
Mhm.
to get her hair cut
Mhm.
in the memory care. And eventually I just brought my own scissors and did it. And that's not a negative on the memory care. It was just a circumstantial thing.
Mhm.
But that's what thriving can look like. Simply doing something that makes your loved one smile. That's it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And having those moments, making sure that when you are spending time with your loved one, that you are remembering to create joy, to tap into the love, tap into what the relationship is. A lot of caregivers become so convicted in their role as a caregiver, that's it. They don't remember that, wow, I'm also a daughter. The role and the relationship that you have with your loved one, it's really important that that takes front and center stage. But oftentimes, because you're so busy advocating, you're so busy being large and in charge of everything, trying to juggle and handle and control so much, right? That what gets lost in the mix is, in fact, the relationship. And that's where the gold lies. Those are the moments. That's what you treasure. That's what you remember. And that's the thing that gives you peace and joy and comfort when your loved one is no longer here.
Yeah. So well said.
Mm.
So well said. I can't even add to that. That's so well said. Who in your life do you consider to be a maverick?
Man, I've really been dreading this question because I can't come up with a one person.
Yeah.
I've been so fortunate over the last 13 years to work with some of the most phenomenal caregivers on the planet. And the caregivers who wake up every day and say, I'm going to do the best that I can do, and I am going to find joy today, right? And I really am going to care for my loved one the way in which I would want to be cared for.
Mhm.
Those are the mavericks in my world. And every day I have the privilege of working with caregivers across the country who have just simply determined that since I can't change this, since this will not morph into what I want it to be, I am simply going to show up as best as I possibly can today, right? And it's so important to focus just on today because it can be so overwhelming to think about next week or next month for that matter, especially if you're dealing with a loved one who has a chronic or critical illness. It really can be overwhelming. But the Mavericks are the ones who focus on today and determine that today I'm going to show up as my best self, and I'm going to do the best job that I can in caring for my loved one, being there for my loved one.
It's beautiful, and it's so hard to do some days. Like, we
Oh
have to
yeah.
dig deep, right? And I
Mhm.
posted recently on social media, there was a statistic, 22%. My guess is it's more like 82%, honestly, of
Mhm.
caregivers go home at the end of the day feeling like they didn't do enough. I
Oh, absolutely.
maybe it's 100% because
Mhm.
really, as you described, so many of us, um, go home and, some of us go home and that's it. We're still caregiving. We're caregiving 24/7. Some
Exactly.
of us have the ability to go home and have a little separation
Mhm.
and kinda get ourselves back together, right? But at the end of the day, feeling like you haven't done enough when you have done super heroic efforts all day long, man,
Mhm.
that's a tough place to be, and that's where the caregiver fatigue and, um, I actually had a dear friend of my parents say that she was a reluctant caregiver to her husband. Not that she didn't want to caregive,
Mhm.
but
Mhm.
man, that was not what her primary role in his life had been all his
Mhm.
life, and it was
Mhm.
really hard for her. She wanted to be wife, not
Exactly.
I mean, you kinda become a mother, I hate to say that, but that you kind of,
Mhm.
become a parent and in charge
Mhm.
person, and that's a really, really hard transition for spouses to
It,
make.
it it really is. It's hard whenever the role that you're the dominant role and relationship has to change. And depending upon the disease and the circumstances, That's very much the reality, right? And I have one caregiver who says, she says every morning, part of her mantra is, today may not be the day that I want it to be, but I trust that I can show up as the best me with whatever this day brings.
Wow.
Right? And so we can't control it, and that's part of the recognition, is recognizing that we don't get to control what the dynamics are, and we can't control the trajectory of the disease process, but we can control our reaction. We can control how we choose to show up and how we choose to be in the moment. And again, like you said, it's very, very difficult, but it's a daily decision. And taking it one day at a time makes it plausible. Whereas looking at the whole, it's like, you're absolutely a deer in headlight. But if you're just looking at today, what is it that I can do today? What am I able to do today? How am I choosing to support my loved one? How am I choosing to take care of myself in the process of caring for my loved one? Right? And
Yeah.
sometimes self care means that today is the day that I can't show up. I can't be there for my loved one today because I must take care of me today.
Yeah. And that there's no shame in that. There's no guilt in that. It's
None.
a it's a healthy, beautiful thing to do for yourself and for the person you're caring for.
It is absolutely essential, and I call it my non-negotiable. It is absolutely the
Yeah.
non-negotiable.
Yeah.
Self-care, the hypocrisy of saying I'm taking care of someone else while I am not tending to my own needs. Oh, I'm preparing this nutritious, fabulous meal for my loved one, and I didn't bother to make enough for myself
Yeah.
because my priority, my
Grab
focus is
Burger
on
King on my way home, right? Yeah, yeah. I shouldn't say
absolutely.
Burger King, but Chick-fil-A. No, I don't know. Um, so what action would you ask our audience to take after hearing this conversation?
So the first action is to have the conversation. Have the conversation with family members, with your siblings. If you're fortunate enough to have your parents, then sit down and talk, or have a Zoom call and talk about, hey, you know what? There's just been a lot that's happened in the last 18 months that we could never have predicted. And as a result of that, it kind of makes sense for us as a family to talk about how we will show up as a family and what we will do if and when life happens. And we'd like to hear from you, Dad, in terms of what your preferences are. What do you want? What do you want? Do you want to stay in your home? And what's in place for that to even be possible? You know,
Yeah,
and Kathy, you mentioned the facility. It's really important to understand the costs associated with long-term care. That's a serious factor in terms of whether or not a facility is an option, right? And so the conversations are important, asking the questions, and even as you said earlier, Kathy, when there's resistance, when your parents refuse to have the conversation with you, then facilitate the process of them having that conversation with someone else,
yeah,
some other trusted source, because it is absolutely essential.
yeah. And it takes courage. So I would
Yes.
say get your courage up and do it.
I always say, put on your big girl panties, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah,
make it, and yeah, because it does. But the thing is that it takes much less courage to have that conversation than it does to move forward with a plan of action and to actually be in that space of caring when the conversation has never happened.
agreed. Absolutely
Mhm.
agreed. Then you're in a position of making decisions that you're not prepared to make. And they're not
Exactly.
really your decisions to make, but you are the
Mhm.
one who has to make them. Yeah,
Exactly.
yeah, interesting. Well, um, so how can people find you? You're an author. You've written some super fun titles on your books. I love them. Share a little bit
Thank
about your book.
you. I'm from New Orleans, and so gumbo is in my DNA. And so my book series, it's a caregiver's book series, it's the Gumbo series. So the first in the series is Tears in My Gumbo, the caregiver's recipe for resilience. I use the analogy that gumbo is a whole lot of stuff that goes into making gumbo, and you can do it by yourself, but it's so much more fun and such a better experience when you have help. You've got somebody else doing some of the chopping, somebody else peeling the shrimp while you're dealing and making that roux for the gumbo. Just like the caregiving journey. Yeah, you can do it by yourself, but a support system makes the journey so much better for everyone involved. And so the second book in the Gumbo series is Prayers in My Gumbo, the caregiver's recipe for peace. And that's really all about how necessary it is to tap into a source greater than yourself. And I'm a respecter of all walks of life and religion and whatever it is that works for you. I have nature lovers and tree huggers who share their experiences in the book, and I certainly have those who are devout in their spiritual walk who share their experiences. They share poems, they share sweet stories, and some share their prayers and their mantras and their meditations. And so that is just a collection of inspiration and support from the spiritual realm of how to survive and thrive in the caregiving journey. And the two books that I'm working on now is the Caregiver's Journal, which is journaling in my gumbo. Journaling and compassion in my gumbo. And then we're actually working on a cookbook with personal chef Lisa Givens that we're really excited about. And we're inviting caregivers from around the country to submit their favorite recipes and their funny and their sweet caregiver stories as a collection, a part of the collection for recipes in my gumbo.
Oh, that's great. You heard it here, guys. If you have a recipe, if you have a story, share it with Nadine. And what a cool series, the Gumbo series for
Gumbo series.
caregivers. Just
Yeah.
unbelievable. Keep doing what you're doing. You're amazing. How can people get a hold of you?
Sure. You can reach me at tcgcares.com. And as always, the phone works beautifully 303-394-1963. And we're always available. I also want to mention that every Monday, 12 noon Mountain Standard Time, we do a Calling All Caregivers support group call via Zoom, and we invite caregivers from across the country. And we have folks from New York, we have folks from Louisiana, folks from Texas, and of course Colorado, who join us every single Monday at 12 noon to share, to ask questions, to be supported. And this has been going on. We've been doing this well over a year now, and we're not stopping. We know that the need is there, and we're available. So we always invite people to join, caregivers who think that they may be in training or it's on the horizon. Don't hesitate. Please join us. Talk to us.
Whether you
Absolutely.
have your training wheels or your professional license, right? It's
Exactly.
and what a great way to bring caregivers together in a non-intrusive way where if all you need to do is show up to know that you're not alone, but you're not
Absolutely.
prepared to say anything, show up, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
Fabulous.
Mhm.
Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Nadine. And for our audience, you can meet Nadine in person September 16th and 17th at our event, Collaboration in Aging. Just go to collaborationinaging.com. We're super excited. Nadine has a session that she'll be running. If you are at all interested in the senior care world, in caregiving in any way, shape, or form, you are a caregiver, this is the event that you want to come to. It is local in Denver. It is a nationwide event. We have people coming from all over, but if you're here in Denver, it's right up the street and downtown Denver. So please come join us. And we're excited to see each other.
Very much so. Really, really excited for what this event will do, collaboration in aging. And I think the innovation and just the people that are coming together. So thank you, Kathy, for making collaboration in aging possible. I think
Well, thank
it's
you. It's a
excellent content.
whole Thank you. It's a whole team of people, but
Yes.
we're looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Nadine. Appreciate your time today. And anyone, if you have questions, post them on the links and we will get them over to Nadine if you don't get a hold of her directly. Thanks for joining us, everyone, and have a